Hello and welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Climate Change at Azim Premji University, where we find wonderful people who visit us from different corners of the world and get to talk to them about sustainability. As always, this is a wide-ranging conversation, and it's a real pleasure to welcome Professor José Puppim de Oliveira from Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, and he's here in Bangalore for a couple of days, and we managed to get him here. So Professor Pim works at FGV in Brazil, and he has a number of affiliations. It's hard to describe and do justice to his excellent work, but I'll try to just give you a quick introduction that he has a master's degree in planning and management from Japan, and then a Ph.D. from MIT, and has worked and taught in different places in the world, including the United Nations University in Japan as well as in Manila, and now holds joint appointments also in with China, and I think divides his time pretty much between Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. Right? So it's a great pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Harini, for having me.
And his work is extremely fascinating. We sit on the editorial board of Urban Transformations, which is a journal together. But José has also been working on a number of different areas with interface with international organizations, with small businesses, with teaching like any faculty member does, with research. And just the variety of ways in which you look at cities and sustainability is very fascinating, I think, and a very new intersection because we have not had conversations with someone like you. So it's a real, I think, looking forward to this topic.
Yes, thank you. I look forward to it as well.
So let's start with your work on cities. Did you grow up in cities or were you a rural kid?
No, I'm a very urban person. Mm-hmm. I grew up in Rio in a very urban neighborhood, Tijuca. That's close to the Maracanã Stadium, very big stadium. And I have also, since I was young, I liked nature. Mm-hmm. And where I live, I live in front of a national park. Rio is interesting because you have a national park in the middle of the city, the Tijuca National Park, and the cities around the national park. And I always have this interaction between very urban, very dense, and in the nature, the park. And not much the rural part is missing. I'm not a very rural person. I have done some work in rural, but I'm more very urban or very
nature.
And
this
is
very
why
interesting.
I got interested in nature,
Right.
And I had a chance to be in my hometown, the Rio 92. And then I got interested in sustainability, and originally I'm an engineer, but then over time I moved my career from an engineer. I work in an oil company. My first job was an oil company, and then but I started doing work also in more environmental related, and over time I moved it to more environmental planning. And
so this is, I think, I'm sure, of great interest to the young people watching this, both from your part of the world and my part of the world and wherever else they died in. Because we often think, I think especially at that young age, that you do a master's in something, or you do an engineering degree and it binds you for life to that work. But you had a very interesting trajectory. So from the engineering degree, what was your next, the master's? How did you move to that master's?
Well, the engineer gave me a lot of skills, technical skills. And in the beginning of the environmental discussions, we look at 80s or 70s, 80s, was you have the science and then you have the solution.
Yes.
You have the engineering solution for this and it won't happen. And then my master tried to move more in the direction of environmental issues. And I really believe that you have the science and you have the skills to implement the science, things will happen. But over time, I saw that also a lot of these are more political, economic decisions. And I started moving more towards social science. And the work I do now, I do still a lot of more related social science work, but I have also this background in the more technical part that I understand. I think the strength is I understand all the chemistry behind sustainability, physics, but also now the social science. And social science was exactly to understand the decisions, why people don't use science that they should be using. And it's why my PhD, I went more towards social science. So we used to try to understand decisions, the planning. I'm background in in planning,
Right.
urban planning, because basically planning is about how decisions happen.
And MIT is very strong anyway in urban planning.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And then I do the mix with environmental planning, and it had MIT, the school has the department of urban planning it has very strong international development.
Yes.
At that time I was there in the 90s, international development focus.
Right.
And then I did my work both in environment, but also environmental planning, but also economic development, international development. You know.
Yesterday, I was having a conversation with a friend who's also a vice chancellor of a very large university in Punjab who was visiting. And we were having the same conversation that when we were young and doing our PhDs, we strongly believed in I would call it the arrogance of the scientist myself, but in the belief that we are here to provide you the solutions. And if policymakers don't listen to us, it's their fault because, here we've given them the best science. And then you start realizing that policymakers have a different logic. And to them, it's often, there is the political economy and the corruption, but there's also often a compelling reason why they're also looking at a perspective different from what you do. And then you have to start learning how to collaborate. So myself, I started a lot of work in forests, and that was the first 15 years of my PhD and post-PhD work. But I realized you can't influence decisions in a forest environment if you're not living there.
Yeah.
And so I started looking at the city because that's where we're based and that's where we can actually work with different decision makers. And of course, as you've been working with cities, you work with policymakers, you work with international NGOs, maybe the Convention on Biological Diversity and those kinds of conventions, national groups of cities, small businesses. So how do you find that? Do you find that urban actors receptive to this kinds of discussions about policy? Now, you're saying you shifted gears, right? You didn't start with the arrogance of the scientist saying, here's my solution, but more collaboratively. So do you find people are receptive to these ideas?
Yeah, I think that there are many dimensions of this connection. One dimension is the science itself, but another, as I mentioned, these other things, the political economy. There is also a communication thing, how you communicate, and people understand, and they think probably differently. And they act on these a lot, on their interests. And also the issue of values, like values that you see now, a transition and generation.
Yes.
Of young people has different values than we have, and then our generation or the generation before, and there's this change in values over time. And this connection between nature and city has also moved in this direction. Like, there is now more science on this. There is more communication, and the values also helps. Because the value of people today helps you to make this transition, and the young people. But still have the political economy, because when you bring nature to city, it's not always a win-win situation. And then people may have to trade off between nature and other things they value. Affordable housing. If you make a lot of parks in the city, you have scarce land, and then the price of the housing go up. And then, I think
more nature, less equity, in a sense.
Yeah. On the one hand, there is this value that you accept more nature in the city, and also to accept some of these trade-offs.
Right.
And I think this generation will accept. And some of the young people today, they are more willing, for example, live in a smaller house.
Yes.
Or many of them I know, my students, they don't have a car. They don't want to have a car ever. They want to be walkable city, and things that they can walk to the nature.
And Brazilian cities have a lot of public transportation in the recent years, or not?
Yeah, Brazil varies a lot. The cities in general, the big cities, you have public transportation, but one of the big issues is affordability in Brazil. I use public transportation in India, and Brazil is several times more expensive.
Okay.
For example, the metro here uses like 20 rupees. In Rio, it's 10 times more, the metro.
So that
and our income is not 10 times more than income in Bangalore.
And then
but you have many cities, you have also a lot of innovations. One thing looking how is innovation, you have Curitiba, for example. Curitiba is a city actually hosts one of the
Right.
COPs, no, but it's a well-known city. We do a lot of innovation in the urban
The bus
transportation.
transport,
Bus rapid transit that started in Curitiba. Now there are like hundreds of cities around the world, including India, that have
Yes.
it. But also in biodiversity, Curitiba is well known for doing the biodiversity incorporation in the city with different mechanisms. No? And then I think like this, the cities they have a lot of these opportunities now to bring this sustainability thing to the core. You know?
Yeah.
And they have all the waves in their side. You have the science, you have the people more willing, they have the communication, but the political economy is, I think, something that we need to.
It's not
work.
easy. That's the
It's
challenge.
not easy
No,
sometimes.
because that's not an obstacle that can be cracked by better communication or better data or right. There's the vested interest involved.
Yeah, vested interest, and also people are willing to trade off nature for other things. You know, they have a bigger house. And I saw when I was coming from Bangalore downtown to here, number of villas and condos that will be built. They have advertisement.
Yes.
And other people will be willing to,
Yes,
no, nature is nice, but I prefer living in a villa.
So we've done a lot of work on Bangalore's famous for its bungalows and old houses. I mean, the tradition always was in Bangalore not to have apartments, to have and it could be a small house with a large garden, but the garden would always be the centerfold. And when we started studying this about 10, 15 years ago, and we looked at a number of these places over time, we wanted to go back. Even 2-3 years later, when we went back to collect data, many houses had expanded. And the Indian system is when your children grow up and get married, often they live with you. So the next generation moves in and you have a joint family system. And then you just sacrifice your garden to build another room or something like that. Or the parents have the house and they pass away, and then the children sell it to a real estate developer who then wants to build 3 or 4. So it's not high-rise apartments, but it's 3 or 4 houses in the same place, which means you don't have a house owner who cares about the greenery, right? So that when land prices go up, the space for nature we find is very cramped. At least that's what we see. And Rio has incredibly high population density, so does Sao Paulo. Right?
And then it's the different ways you disseminate nature in the cities. You know, the physical space is one. You can have like national park, like Rio has a national park, but you are very poor in the other aspects of nature, close, like we don't have many close by, for example, squares, or the buildings, not much nature in the buildings. And now, for example, there are a lot of green roofs.
There are.
You can do, a lot of places have, you lose the individual garden, but there are a lot of community gardens in areas of the government. Like London is very well known for this. A lot of community gardens, even urban agriculture.
Yes.
Like people care to get about allotments in the government.
Yes.
And it could be a solution. For example, in Bangalore, a lot of roofs. I saw not much on the roofs.
Not that much. So Chennai is doing something with the Chief Resilience Officer looking at roofs in slums, especially in informal settlements, to see if people can do urban gardening. You know, you reduce your food miles, but you get healthy food and you get community interaction. So.
Yeah, and then you can actually connect the problems. We have done some work on a city in the southern Brazil, Florianópolis, and one of the innovations there always started with the composting. They didn't have in the slums or poor areas, the streets are very narrow, the trucks could not go inside. And they started actually doing a lot of composting. But they didn't have how to use the compost, and they didn't have space. But they could get some public areas to do urban agriculture, community urban, where they use the compost. And these later on was disseminated across the city. And now I have hundreds of these community gardens where people do the composting, but the city gave allotments for, in general, the public areas, like public space, or sometimes private space that they have concession. A lot of clinics, schools, and they use the urban agriculture to first training and do education on compost, the importance of composting, and the children, for example, in the schools they go, but also to teach children about, agriculture or urban agriculture or nutrients in the different foods. And for example, in the clinics, they do a lot of work on medicinal plants. You have a long tradition, but they plant in the space. Instead of a garage or parking lot, you have, and this grill is very interesting. It so connect the waste problem with the urban agriculture and now connect. And now they use with education, for education purpose, also health part. A lot of people, they work in these gardens, you know, for entertainment. It's good for mental health. And also one of the things I was watching a movie about the blue zones. A lot of people, the important part is this the social connection of these blue zones. People live longer, no?
Yes.
And this, a lot of people now, they are old, they are alone in their house, you know, because the children are too busy to. But now they can connect through these spaces, you know, these activities. And I think I found how they could connect the sectors, you know, this innovation that comes.
So that brings me to one question. I mean, clearly innovation, we have to be very innovative because we don't have the spaces for the national parks or the big parks in cities anymore. We have to find smaller ways like allotment gardens, which do multiple things at the same time. Maybe give you food. I mean, to me, I love trees with blossoms, but now I'm firmly of the opinion that places like Bangalore cannot afford to spend a lot of time on trees which only give you pretty flowers, but they must also give you fruit, maybe also be used by children, give you shade, clean up pollution, because you have such few of them. But if you think of it that way, so cities are innovating and people are doing these. But I was struck by what you said about Curitiba and the fact that so many other cities have learned from it, right, on the bus rapid transport. And it's a classic example. Or the allotment gardens, which is spreading. You have a paper where you've talked about transnational networks of cities. And your argument, if I can summarize, I hope I'm summarizing it correctly, is the fact that national governments and international treaties are not going to be sufficient to talk our way out of the biodiversity crisis, the climate crisis, and all of these sustainability crises. But cities are now learning from each other in terms of innovation, and that can spread. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the kinds of places, apart from the bus rapid transport, that you've seen these spread. And secondly, maybe tell me, do you think it's spreading fast enough, or are there things that we can do to help these innovations spread faster?
Yeah, this was part of a project you have on governing food, water, energy in cities using green and blue infrastructure. Was a five. Unfortunately, it was the COVID in the middle.
Yeah.
But they did it mapped, and they had one of our partners was the ICLEI, the local government for sustainability. And then you map all the innovations. The ICLEI, particularly in the South, global South, Asia, Latin America, and Africa. And based on that, you try to develop an idea of how cities innovate. And the way they do is they have to create the capacity to do the things, new things. The cities need to innovate like us, when you have to get some knowledge. And then part of these, the next step is from where this knowledge comes from.
Right.
The learning mechanisms, how to learn the cities to do. And this was the main idea.
Right.
And then you mapped it over time, and then you did 10 cities, in-depth studies in 10 cities, 4 in Asia, 4 in Africa, and 2 in Brazil, where you did an in-depth study of innovation, how does innovation happen, how the city acquired the knowledge, and so on. And when a strong part of these, I think even because also ICLEI was our partner, a lot of them have this, they learn from other cities.
Right.
And then the transnational networks are very important to bring this knowledge, particularly if more transformative in innovation, things that you don't find nearby. Because the challenge of innovation when you have international or transnational networks, that you have an idea, but the context is very different.
So can you give us an example?
An example of something that you could think of. For example, one city you study here in India was Gangtok in northern India. And Gangtok, they had a market, and there are all waste in the market that would go to a river.
Ah, right.
And they defined solutions through these transnational networks. They worked together because the mayor there was linked to and asked for help. And then what they did was a machine that would be used in other places that would process a lot of this waste and then became compost. And they could use the composting in their parts. And then this transnational network work with. This is a little bit of finance as well, but most of this finance for the city. And then all the management of the machine is done by the local vendors. You know, they have a system where all the waste they collect and they process, and then later on this composting they use in different gardens, public and private. You know, and it's interesting how this knowledge came, and the city more transformation. This will not happen, maybe, but it took a while to actually adapt the solution to, because a lot of these machines they are done in the north, and the weather is very different, and then all kind of food or waste they have it different, and it took a while to adapt to the local context, and also how they finance. This is more the institutional part. When you have learning from opportunities from neighbor cities, is the learning in general quicker because the context is very similar. But when you have international networks, this is the context, how to and then you need a lot of innovation for that. There are different organization processes, and you look at this, how this innovation happen. Because you need also, if you're local governments, you need to adapt a little bit your institutional settings or organization to actually absorb the best of this innovation, be able to implement this innovation in your context. No?
Because this kind of learning is, of course, done very well in networks like networks of farmers or barefoot practitioners, but there it's an individual learning from another individual. And an institution learning from an institution is not so easy because there's who in the institution learns, there's the structures, the hierarchies, the norms of that and of that institution, the ways of functioning which have to learn from each other.
Yeah, exactly. Because companies in general, large companies, they have a R&D department.
Right.
But most of the even big cities, they don't have.
They don't have an R&D.
Or people to think that have some group of people qualified to think and how to. And sometimes they have. Some cities they have, but these people don't have the power to later on to make sure that innovation. But there are examples of cities that, and most of the cities, I think, they have some group of people thinking in general close to the mayor, and some of these transnational organizations, they try to also support that. The Rockefeller Foundation had this network, but now I think is a little bit
not so active,
phased out. But if they created a person next to the mayor with the power to bring it in, it could do a lot of power to innovate. But I think a lot of the innovations, this is a big difference between business and public administration. Business, a lot of patent. We cannot use other people's idea because they're patent. But cities, you don't have these. The innovations
this is interesting. I never thought of it that way.
Because all you want to do is a patent. You can use your company, the same product or same process you have to buy it.
Sustainability innovations are restricted to that small
sphere. It's rocket science, not rocket. It's there in the internet or your neighbor. You just go to, and what you see, a lot of cities, they are very willing to disseminate the practice and even make efforts, a lot of pairing of cities, make effort to
learn. So this brings me to another question then which comes up. Since you've been working with all kinds of actors, so there's transnational actors, city governments, small businesses, you said recently, since you're now working in what has now become a business school, you work with small businesses, maybe activist groups, do you work with them at all?
A little bit.
Then groups of communities that work with children, young people. Do you use different communication or education or outreach strategies or engagement strategies with these different groups? And what do you feel has worked well, what has not worked well?
When you have a research to a lot of what call now transdisciplinary research, there are a lot of co-production.
Yes.
I like a lot to do co-production work with the other actors.
Yes.
Did they bring research questions or help us refine our research question or how you answer our research question?
So we should just explain for those who don't know what co-production means, what co-production is.
To think transdisciplinary research is the research that's inter and multidisciplinary, several disciplines, and each discipline connect to the others. But also, addition to these has the co-production of actors that are interested in the research. Co-production means you co-produce the knowledge. The knowledge it will help us to first refine our research question, also to how we're going to answer a research question, and also later on will help us to disseminate the knowledge.
So it's
or
not your
be able
engineer
to-
who your first beginning of, this is the engineer, here's my knowledge, take it.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
the opposite of that.
Yeah, exactly. Direct. But even though the engineers now are more open, but
Yes,
in
they are,
general,
of course.
architectures also in the
Yes.
past were very, you had to
Yes.
know what to do. But now they consult a lot of consultations with
Yes.
clients or with communities, how they do it. But the same with the research. I think the researchers, in order to have a larger impact, it's always important to connect with people going to use our knowledge since the beginning.
Yeah.
Not just now have a paper in Nature, here, read it, and then apply the knowledge. But in general, it's important to have the academic part. I think the science need to be right. But it later on helps, the co-production helps you to disseminate this knowledge.
And are different groups, different types of actors more amenable or less amenable to co-production? Some might take longer to break through and build trust. Do you find any differences? Like again, thinking of the kinds of actors you work with, how have businesses received your approaches to interaction, let's say, versus city governments versus activists?
Yeah. The issue is, I think larger organizations, there are advantages and disadvantages, like large government or large company. Because a lot of times they have the resources and to actually bring this knowledge and make a difference. But a lot of time the actors who engage, they don't have the agency. They don't have the power to use their knowledge because there are other interests, other things the company want to do or the city want to do. And the people move a lot also within the organizations. And the smaller organizations in general, is the other way around. Maybe they don't have the resources and the knowledge, but they have much easier to
pivot and transform.
Transform it. And I like the working with smaller organizations, small business, because in general where they have more potential to, you have the resources, and then also a lot of them need to bring also the resources. But if you have the knowledge and you know how to do it, my understanding is also much easier to find. You have a good idea, someone who is going to fund you. And then they have this challenge. The big organization, they have the resources and also could be a large impact, but they don't have sometimes the people we work with because organizations
it's like a large ship that you have to turn with some difficulty.
It's very difficult for them later on to go convince their colleagues or their bosses to that's a good idea and get. In governments also the same. A city like Bangalore, like thousands of employees, you talk to someone, maybe it's middle management or even high management, it's not the mayor. And the mayor, sometimes you have the issue in these companies in government, people change a lot with elections and then we have election, a lot of people change in the middle and the idea lost.
The idea is lost, exactly.
The idea is lost. But small business sometimes is very individual. The individuals are there, like the owner of the business.
So can you tell us about any success stories that you don't have to tell us the identifying details if you don't want to, but anything that makes you positive? Because I often wonder, climate changes and urban sustainability is otherwise a dismal field, right? We hear about the problems and sometimes it's inspiring to hear about things that worked.
Yeah, maybe you could, let me see one story from this project I just mentioned about the managed food, water, energy in cities, use green blue infrastructure. One city we worked in, it was in Brazil, was São José dos Campos, like my name, São Joseph of the Fields. But it's a relatively medium-sized city, like 700,000. And it's where the Brazilian aeronautic industries is well known because they build the airplane, Brazilian airplane there. But the city is all the windows of opportunity. When we were there, they had already for example, an initiative to give property tax breaks for people who use solar panels on the roofs. But they didn't have green roofs. And green roofs also have a lot of benefits for the city, more collective benefits than even, I think, maybe more than solar energy, because you avoid, flooding and also you can save energy in the cooling in this part. But they didn't have any incentives. And because of our work, and you work directly in the co-producing the knowledge with the city. And they included in the law now also the incentives for green roofs. And then there are all kinds of green infrastructure. They use it, including green roofs. They can get some benefits in terms of tax. Because when the opportunity, the person who worked saw that there was this, why don't you include, and also there's a lot of this innovation they have the window, right time to include it. For example, master plans. If you have cities revise their master plan, do a master opportunity to bring idea, because once it's there, it's difficult to change.
And this balances your political economy statement of some time back, where you were saying, I mean, the hardest part to fix in a city is the political economy is against green spaces because land is valuable. But if you make green spaces valuable for tax breaks, then you can't fix it, but you can compensate for part of it.
Yeah, exactly. Because the political economy, I think the first step, and I have done some of this even book on India, and the core benefits of climate change. Right. Climate change has not all climate change solution in all places will be win-win situation, but there are a lot of win-win situations. And a lot of times you can innovate to get this win-win. Right. You have to do something differently, and they make it much easier the political economy. If you convince that we have so benefit for the climate, but the benefit for the individuals or for the city, and then much easier to get it through. Absolutely. And I think the low-hanging fruits, people say, and the climate change, I think, should start in the cities for these low-hanging fruits, things that would benefit them all, and then get later on to...
I think this is a very important point, because we always tend to start with the big things and tell them you're doing all of these things wrong. And these are the dangers that will come to you. And people are dealing with firefighting on the ground. So you have to give them low-hanging fruit that gives you the... It's like the energetic, the valley, right? You have to get them over that hump into a different place where they can move. And sometimes this boost is what you're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think sometimes is the problem is the issue is too big to change. And then you need a lot of transaction costs to get everyone together and to move it. And sometimes these things change in the organization. When you do this government change and the common doesn't like the idea, start all over again. But some things that you can reduce this. For example, when you do individual house, it's much easier because it's one person, the owner, like put solar panel, we got saving. It's why it's very popular in many parts of the world. Today have all these solar panels and make sure you go to China and go to Shanghai, you look at all houses and solar panel on the top. They have a lot of benefits, even if you don't have tax incentives, but you can save your electricity bill. And they have to finance. A lot of banks now, public and private, they finance you to do that. To get and you see opportunity for the banks as well, and low, and for the company who sell, has a bank who is going to give credit, and sometimes is even the credit helps you to instead of pay the electricity bill, pay the credit, the bank, the loan. But after 2 years or 3, you don't have the loan anymore, but you have the cheaper electricity bill. And then it's interesting, they could look at the agents of this change and with facilitate like individuals, and then also convince the city to I think it's sometimes very important to give it incentives, because you get benefits for the city as well. We have a lot of lack of green areas in Bangalore. It could benefit allotments of the city. The city saves because the management of this space is given to the communities. The communities manage, and you don't have to put like a department of to manage that. I saw a lot of I was downtown, the allotment area, the cantonment area. A lot of green areas that's abandoned, basically. They don't use for housing, they don't use for green space. And now they could, I think there's opportunity to give that allotment to...
But you're also then pointing out to an important point, just showing sometimes the economics analysis or saying this is your core benefits, you should do it. Who will do it? And how do you convince the person in charge that it's useful for them, or the people in charge at various levels that they should all get together and do it? And often I think either you go right to the bottom or you go right to the top. And at the bottom is difficult because they will do the work, but they don't have the power. At the top, they have the power, but really not, because the day-to-day decisions are done by the people who are at the site.
Yeah.
And that's why I find your work very interesting, because you're actually trying to look at when does this, like you're talking about windows of opportunity, and
Yeah.
who's the decision maker? How do you convince the decision maker? Right?
Yeah, exactly. And also these, you sometimes have to innovate, do things differently. People are used to do the same thing. It's very difficult to change the way they do it. And sometimes you need people and organizations, they move behind interests, no? And then you have like some benefits to do it. They look at different, and they know how to do it. Also reduce the cost because they know how to do something you don't know, we are scared of do it kind of not going. But if you know it, and then the way you know it, sometimes also see the other doing, your neighbor doing, they did it, why I cannot do it?
Why cannot do it?
And I see a lot of these. I haven't done much research on this, but I see more practical. A lot of people adopt like solar panel idea because the neighbor did it.
Yes.
And decided the neighbor now saving, why cannot do it? And then ask the neighbor and then tell her the benefit. Okay, now we're going to my house, and then but there are ways you could, a public policy or civil society organization could spread this this knowledge, and the way how to do the practical knowledge. Someone who work from the traffic is bad, who work from 8 to 6 and take an hour to get to the work and back, and the children, the school, they will not have time to. But maybe you have a weekend, they are tired, but if someone make it easier, camp and do things for you.
Yeah, exactly.
And then a lot of these organizations that could be business, small business.
Could be small business that uses this entrepreneurial opportunity.
I was reading about these, one of the big challenge for electric cars, actually the chargers.
Yes, exactly. And they produce the cars, but nobody thinks about who's going to do the charging.
Particularly in apartments, like cities where a lot of apartments, because or maybe you have a garage space, but how you connect the electricity. But now, like a lot of business coming to help to do individual charger. And then you have a garage and individual charger. And I saw some of the buildings, actually the garage was free, but then they could not do this because you have to put in your electricity bill, and then it divided. Now this apartment will park here, this will park here, and you have this
meter kind of
meter for your bill, and then facilitate a lot of this business, and a lot of people now can have an electric car because it's.
So if you look at all your work in the global south specifically, India, a lot of it, and because I know you work on India a lot, but also the global south cities which are transferable to India, can you give us examples of specific things you think will work in Indian cities? Like a city, this city has tackled its traffic problem well, or this city has tackled its waste problem well.
Yeah. The big difference between more developed country and developing country is exactly the resources. Sometimes in a lot of these countries, the resources is not a problem.
Yes, absolutely.
They have resources, they have the capacity, just question the political economy again. Yes. But for us, sometimes you don't have the resources.
No, you don't.
And then you have to get the knowledge, local knowledge that I think is underused a lot. Things, the solutions that are already happening, and how to scale up the solutions. I know your work on the lakes. I heard a lot of problem water here.
Yes,
because probably they didn't use your lessons, like your work too. And it could these things that I think the solutions that should have this component that external, but should have a strong local component, and then the solution should be a mix of this, because a lot of times you don't learn our own what's going on in our cities. You could spread up of these things, and for example, here in Bangalore, this example of water is one now they have a lot of lakes, and how city 1,000 lakes, no 1,000 million lakes. So how a city of million lakes can run out of water?
Exactly.
And maybe they didn't use the knowledge.
They didn't use the knowledge. What we find here, the moment they started importing water from outside, all these thousands of millions or whatever of lakes all disappeared. And now you find that you can't import water from outside because there isn't enough water to import from the river. And now you've realized that you've depleted your groundwater. Whereas if you were dependent on the groundwater from the beginning, or the lakes from the beginning, and you continued that dependency, then people were not profligate. They were very frugal with their use.
Yeah, and then the difference from the the developing countries for the climate change was a big difference. The developing countries, they developed in a way that increase a lot their footprint.
Yes.
And now they are already high socioeconomic indicators,
yes.
but the high also footprints, and they want to reduce. But they have the resources and all, and maybe can trade off some of the economic development. But developing countries, what do you fall in the same path with same technologies?
You can't, right? We can't. And then,
exactly.
There's not enough resources in the earth.
And at the same time, you not have the resources later on to reduce, and they'll be stuck like this. We run out of water because you try to. The developed countries, they could bring, like New York, bring the water from 400 kilometers. They have put a big pipe, and but here they don't have. Even some ideas. I think Chennai was trying to do a big pipe.
Yes, and
didn't work. I think I saw even become housing now. People live in the pipes. And I think we should look at our own solutions. I think that and particularly is when you don't have the resources, you have to use as much as possible as local resources. You have to see what we have. Okay, a solution from outside maybe is good for Paris or for London, but here should be adapted somehow. Maybe some parts of this. You cannot just
take the solution and plug it in.
Yeah, exactly.
No plug and play. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And then I see that you are not learning enough.
Yeah.
For some cities they learn. They try to do their own way. Like the example I gave, the Curitiba is a city that has capacity to do their own things. They are using their own resources. And there are some limitations, but they're being able to do that. And in India, I imagine that there are a lot of, as I said, the local solutions working, but they are not enough scale to. Like I said, the lakes, maybe not all the lakes, maybe there are a few lakes that did the right things. Some communities let your work, but not the other 10,000 or how many thousand they didn't do it. And how actually spread this knowledge, use these. And then you need these mechanisms, I think, the city itself to how communities learn from each other, moving. And I know that in Bangalore, I'm not sure if this is correct, but this is a probably decentralization. They're supposed to decentralize a lot of wards. The wards, they don't work as they're supposed to work.
Because there are no functional ward committees.
Yeah, exactly. And then you don't have because you need the organization to spread the knowledge. And then much easier. But now we don't have wards, and then
you have the wards, but not the
city
committees.
Is too big, to one person in the city hall to decide, and they even don't know what's going on in every part.
I guess what we need in conclusion is multiple things. One is the idea of polycentricity. So you have governance at multiple levels. You have the community, the individual people doing things, maybe a rooftop solar, but then the communities that learn from each other. So you learn from your neighbor, and then the communities network with each other to inform the city, or the city works with the communities, and then the cities talk to each other and exchange ideas, right? So that kind of a multi-level governance. But you also need a way for innovation to. I think we're innovating, but what you're saying, if I get you correctly, is that we're not innovating fast enough to deal with the pace of change.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes the way the governments work and the governance, local governance work, because there's a lot of opportunities learning wards, but a lot of the wards are very poor. They don't have the resources. But the city could come and have this mechanism to use the power they have, not to. And sometimes they do it different. They want to impose things.
Yes.
And then make things worse sometimes.
Yeah.
And then instead of actually, let's see what they need and how can spread it, use our resources. And it could even be much, much effective to use the resources, because some things already going on.
Right.
Or already people want to do, and then maybe have even voluntary things that go.
So if we, from there, what would your suggestion be for young people wanting to enter this field of urban sustainability, urban planning? Do you think they should do degrees in these fields, or think of small businesses, or work with governments, or do a mix of all of them?
There are, I think, opportunities for fields. hydrology to chemistry, the pollution of the water, the problem of water here, the hydrology, how the water flows, where it comes from, the chemistry, the housing, how urban planning, development planning, economic development, and how it's best. But the difference, I think, should be the first two much more interdisciplinary. You need to know what the others are doing, how we work together with the urban planner, you said, but you work together with someone doing hydrology, someone with chemistry. And the other way around, the hydrologists need to, accept the knowledge or work together with chemists. And then I think the universities, they are learning slowly this. At the same time, also, I think there's programs here that are very strong immersion in practice.
Right.
They know what is in classroom sometimes doesn't work exactly in classroom.
Yes.
In practice.
Absolutely.
And then you have this, I think will be more these getting this practical work and also this connection among discipline. The problems now are much more complex. And then it'll be much easier for them to move ahead. And at the same time is to connect to the higher level of governance. Like the problem water said is here, but it's also problem maybe the state and national and how you connect your solution when you provide the solution that's connected to this other, because I think the ecosystems also are very connected.
So students have to keep their minds open, or young people basically open to other disciplines, open to different levels of connection, and open to the world of practice and dialogue with all kinds of
and one thing, and then you come with the skills. You need to have the skills that are different from the past, like for example, today, even a lot of data available, but how to use this data and disseminate this data, sometimes you need more analytical tools in data science or knowledge on these. Also negotiation, how we work with people that think different from you, not only in terms of knowledge, physics, chemistry, urban planning, economics, but also in terms of values, what things the political part of this and accept and maybe try to find grounds of, I would say, joint solution. And I think India has a big advantage. India is a very diverse country in terms of religions and also regions, ecosystem. And I think India has naturally, I think you need to have this negotiation part of to live in India, and I think it's a wonderful country to learn from.
Wonderful, Jose. So this has been a very interesting talk, and we're glad that because you've been doing so many things, and I think this is the richness of conversation reflects this. So it's been really nice to have you and talk about all these things, and we would love to have this conversation with you sometime in the future and again dig into a number of issues, because I think we scratched the surface on several things and we need to go deeper, but we would love to do this another time too.
Okay, thank you very much, Harini. And then I really enjoyed this conversation. I also learned a lot from you in the past, and I hope you also in the future have more opportunities to interact and also do things in India, also in other countries.
It will be very interesting to compare Brazilian cities and Indian cities. Yes.
I think I have a lot to learn from India. A lot of things learn from India.
Thank you.
Thank you.